You never worked with asbestos. You never set foot in a shipyard, a factory, or a construction site where asbestos was used. But someone you lived with did, and now you've been diagnosed with mesothelioma. How is that possible? Secondhand asbestos exposure, which is also called para-occupational or take-home exposure, is very real and a very deadly phenomenon that has claimed thousands of lives. Today, I want to explain exactly how it happens and what it means both legally and medically. I'm Terri Oppenheimer, and I've been writing about mesothelioma and asbestos for the website mesothelioma.net for over a decade. I'm not a physician and I'm not a lawyer, and this is not medical or legal advice. But secondhand asbestos exposure is a topic that every family needs to understand. So let's start with the mechanism. How asbestos fibers travel from a worker's job site into their home and then into the lungs of family members who never worked with asbestos themselves. It's pretty simple to understand. When a worker handles asbestos-containing materials, whether they're cutting, drilling, installing, removing insulation, fireproofing, working with gaskets or floor tiles or hundreds of other products, microscopic asbestos fibers become airborne. And these fibers, which are invisible to the naked eye, can coat the worker without them being aware of it, or maybe they are aware of it. One way or another, when the fibers are present, they can settle on the worker's clothing, hair, skin, their shoes. They infiltrate the fabric of their work clothes and embed themselves in the fibers of cotton or polyester. At the end of a shift, when the worker gets in the car to drive home or takes a trolley or subway or bus, the fibers come with them. When they walk through the front door, the fibers enter their home. This is scary, I know, but I want to take a break here to ask you a quick favor. If you find these videos helpful, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. It makes it easier for other people who need this information to find us. Also, if you have questions or there's a topic you'd like to see addressed in a future video, send me a note in the comment section. And make sure you watch until the end, because I'm going to give you valuable information on where to find resources that will make a real difference for you. So, the minute an asbestos-exposed worker walks out of their workplace, the exposure pathways multiply. When a spouse or child greets the worker with a hug at the door, fibers transfer to their clothing and skin. When children climb onto a parent's lap after work, they can breathe in fibers. When work clothes are shaken out in the laundry room before being put in a washing machine, which is something people who didn't know the danger did routinely, they breathe the fibers in, as well as spreading them further throughout the home. The laundry process has proven to be one of the most significant secondary exposure routes. Before washing clothes, people, usually wives or daughters, would shake out heavily soiled work clothes, which released clouds of asbestos fibers into the air. Sorting through a laundry basket of asbestos-containing clothes released more fibers. And doing this work in small, enclosed laundry rooms, that concentrated the fibers further. Beyond the laundry, workers often repaired or stored their work equipment at home, and that brought additional asbestos-containing materials to the family environment. Workers who came home and changed their clothes in the bedroom could leave fibers on carpets and furniture. Those fibers can persist in a home environment for years, continuing to expose family members long after the worker changed jobs, retired, or even died. The health consequences from this unwittingly transported asbestos are real and severe. Secondhand asbestos exposure can cause the same diseases as occupational exposure: mesothelioma, asbestosis, lung cancer, and pleural plaques. The disease develops through the same mechanism. Fibers get lodged in tissue after they're inhaled. This causes chronic inflammation that eventually leads to cancerous or fibrotic changes. Now, one important difference between secondhand exposure and occupational exposure is that the secondary type generally involves much lower overall fiber concentrations than occupational exposure does. A shipyard worker who's surrounded by asbestos all day in enclosed spaces had much higher total exposure than his wife, who handled his work clothes for an hour in the evening. This means that secondhand exposure carries lower absolute risk than heavy occupational exposure. But, and it's a big but, lower risk is not zero risk. Mesothelioma has no known safe exposure level, and there are thousands of documented cases of mesothelioma in people whose only exposure was secondhand. A tragic number of women who never worked in asbestos-contaminated environments have developed mesothelioma from handling their husband's work clothes or being in a home with their father who worked with asbestos. The latency period for the disease is the same regardless of whether the exposure was at work or in the home, anywhere from 20 to 50 years from exposure to diagnosis. This means that women who were exposed by doing laundry in the 1960s and 1970s are only just now starting to develop mesothelioma while they're in their 70s and 80s. They may not even remember the details of their exposure. It was just a normal part of their daily life and obviously didn't seem dangerous at the time. The same is true for children who were exposed to asbestos brought home by their parents. They are another group of common secondhand exposure victims. Anyone who grew up in a home where a parent worked with asbestos can be at elevated risk. Given the 30 to 50-year latency period, many of these individuals are now reaching middle age and older. It's the age range when typical mesothelioma symptoms start showing up. From a medical standpoint, secondhand exposure victims are diagnosed and treated exactly the same way as occupationally exposed patients. The source of the asbestos fibers doesn't change the disease's biology. All treatment options, surgery, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, signing up for clinical trials, they're all equally available. From a legal standpoint, secondhand exposure victims have the same rights to compensation as workers who were directly exposed, and courts have consistently recognized secondhand exposure claims. The legal theory is the same. Asbestos manufacturers knew that their products were dangerous. They knew that fibers were brought home on workers' clothing, and they failed to warn workers or their families of this hazard. Now, evidence has emerged showing that some of the asbestos manufacturers specifically knew about the take-home exposure risk, and still they failed to provide warnings or protective measures like workplace showers or changing facilities or even sealed bags for transporting work clothes. They knew about this, and combined with their inaction, that's forming the basis for major legal liability. Proving secondhand exposure in a legal case does require documenting who the worker was and where they worked, what products they worked with contained asbestos, the work practices that led to the fiber transfer, and how the claimant was exposed to the contaminated clothing or environment. This evidence can be harder to gather than for direct occupational exposure, particularly if the worker has already passed away. But experienced mesothelioma attorneys have handled thousands of secondhand exposure cases, and they know how to build these claims. For surviving spouses filing secondhand exposure claims, the attorney is going to need to reconstruct the worker's employment history, identify the asbestos product manufacturers, document the domestic routines that led to exposure, and establish the causal connection between that exposure and the diagnosis. Secondhand asbestos exposure is a real and serious health risk. Asbestos fibers transported home on work clothing exposed family members, particularly spouses who handled laundry, to enough fibers to cause mesothelioma and other diseases decades later. Secondhand exposure victims have full legal rights to compensation, and experienced mesothelioma attorneys can build cases even when the exposure was indirect. If you believe you were exposed to asbestos through a family member's work and you've developed mesothelioma or another asbestos-related disease, don't assume that you can't file a legal claim because you never personally worked with the material. Your claim can be just as valid as that of a direct occupational exposure victim. Visit mesothelioma.net for information about secondhand exposure and your legal options, or you can call 1-800-692-8608 or use the live chat feature on the website to speak directly to one of our helpful and informative patient advocates. As for me, remember to post your questions below, and I'll see you next time.